their response? Why are most by their response? Oh, okay. How do you book your service?
Yeah, they were thinking about why we don't have service tomorrow, right? And then she asked me about Christian life.
Okay, we're going to get started for real this time. I'm glad that I came back and everybody's talking. If everybody was silent, I would be worried about the church. So actually, maybe I can use this little mishap as an illustration too about effective ministries, because there aren't enough people involved in this one, so that's part of it, right? Okay, so but what we were talking about is, like last week we talked about growing and kind of the different dynamics of moving from one generation to another generation, the dynamics of moving from a small church of like 40 people, or well, like a kind of a mobile mission, right, to a small church of up to maybe 150, maybe 200 people. And then what it looks like if you have more than 200 people, you know, let's say 300 or so people, 350, that kind of thing. We are a church in transition from small to medium, first generation, to second, third generation. We are moving from a church in which few people do most everything to a church in which many people do a few things, okay? So we have already kind of passed that mark where a few people can do everything. That's like 80 people maybe. We're way past that. We still kind of have some residue in our history and in our people, of people who are highly competent and just know everything and do everything, Roxanne being one of them, and have been here from the beginning, almost from the beginning. And so, but as our church grows, we can't just say, okay, Roxanne, bigger workload, just do more of everything. You know, you have to, you really have to change. It's not just like, just tweak things a little bit. It's actually, you do have to actually kind of completely change the structure where you have more clear structures. So I wanted to also just kind of, as we lay the groundwork and kind of understand where we are, what are our realities? We are a church of commuters, and Roxanne said it, like, we've always been that. And actually, we, for a small church, have a relatively high turnover. That's not because Holy Cross is terrible and once people get to know it, they leave. It's because of what's going on in this part of the United States. We're a modern economy. This is the armpit of the country. I mean, this is the capital of the country, and you have lots of people who are involved in, like, Fort Meade, moving here for work, but then moving away. You've got people who are involved with government jobs, which can be relatively stable, but also then sometimes they get involved in contractor jobs. They have ability to kind of work in different places, maybe work remotely. That's another reality that's hit lots of different places that people have moved, right? Not because there's something that, you know, rank in Holy Cross, but because of just the realities of the world. So we have a relatively high turnover for kind of a small church. Big, massive, like Protestant megachurches, they're like, oh yeah, we'll probably have somebody for maybe a year. You know, they expect they're going to have high turnover. Small churches, though, are relatively commonly more stable. But ours in this geographic location is kind of relatively high turnover rate. And we have many new faces. A lot of people are discovering Orthodoxy. And so this is a reality that has touched many Orthodox churches, touching our church as well, thank God. And so what's required now? Structures that allow us to develop effective ministries in which many people can be involved. So that's kind of what I want to talk about tonight, is how we can develop these structures so that many people can be involved in ministries. For instance, this ministry right now, I come up with an idea like, oh, I want to, actually, here's what happens. I'm like, I need to work on this, or I need to learn about this, or our church is kind of going through this, and so I'm going to do a series on this. Marriage, struggling marriages in the parish. We're going to do a series on marriage. the changing nature of our parish and how we need to develop our ministries. Well, that's what this is all about. So this evening kind of lecture series is kind of like a little workshop for me to kind of research things and understand things and have discussions with you. And so it's not just me in my head. So I appreciate you being here tonight. It's not just like a one-way, here, let me dump everything that I know about all these amazing things, because I don't claim to be an expert on any of this stuff. So, but it's a kind of a one-man show. Tonight, Roxanne called me and she's like, hey, you need some more food for tonight? And I was like, yes, because I forgot, because I meant to go by Costco after I dropped my girls off and I forgot. So please, thank you, and please and thank you. But like usually, I just buy the stuff and put it down here and say, hey, somebody set this up. It's like completely a one-man show usually. And, you know, imagine if this were actually a big ministry and there were a group of people that got together and said, hey, what would we like to learn about? And hey, maybe there are people in the region or that we can invite in to talk to us about this. What are some things that the people, basically the adults, adult ed, want to learn about, and how can we make this happen? Hey, I'll be in charge of the streaming. I'll be in charge of the food. I'll be in charge of the child care. And then you kind of would have a group of people that are working together to kind of come up with the ideas and to talk about how they're going to execute it and plan it and blah blah blah. That's what we need to grow to. You have seen where we are. Okay. So I wanted to just give you a quick sense of the kinds of things that we do. And some of these are not one-man shows. Some of these, like the Linthicum Fair, you know, we have lots of people involved in that. And I want to talk about that in a moment. I put these in alphabetical order. Okay, they're not categorized or anything. Adult ed, that's tonight. Agape meals, you know, I'm not going to read them all. But these are a lot of the ministries that we do. I gave you an example of a bad one just now, but let me give you an example of a good ministry that I think is working out really very well, and that is the schoolhouse, Holy Cross Schoolhouse. It used to be called the Holy Cross Co-op, or the co-op, homeschool co-op, right? It's not called a co-op anymore for a reason, because we don't actually want it to be a co-op. We don't want just people every year to come together and say, okay, what are you good at? What do you want to teach? What do you want to teach? What do you want to teach? We want to have a little bit of, but we also don't want it to be a school, right? Where you just come, even if it's a one-day school. We don't want to say, here, we've got all these amazing teachers lined up. We've got this program. Come plug your kids into the program. We do want it to involve people. So you've got the families who are involved in the schoolhouse. But then what happened last year, the year before, we had kind of like a council or a steering committee. And they got together, and it was not everybody who was involved in it. It was the people who, you had to be a member of Holy Cross, because there are people in the co-op, in the schoolhouse, who are not members of Holy Cross. You had to be a member of Holy Cross. And you had to be teaching one of the kind of main sections, right? There are, they're called upper form and lower form and all this stuff. And so we kind of had these rules for who would be on the steering committee, but not everybody would be on it. But it was members of the schoolhouse who were on the steering committee. And it had a headmistress. Last year it was Mallory, this year it's Kelsey. And that group got together and made a handbook. It's like, okay, here are some kind of procedures. You know, what if you're sick? How do we know when we're going to call off the day? What do you do if you're having disciplinary problems with some of the kids? All of these. So what are our policies and procedures for, like, just keeping kids safe? This kind of thing, right? And then also planned out then, okay, we need these kinds of things, but then each person kind of gets to do their own thing within a certain constricted area. Like, okay, well, we need you to take math or something like that. I don't know. What did you tell Joel?
We wanted him to do some kind of literature
Okay.
and Greek.
We want you to do some kind of literature and Greek.
That's
Okay,
for
well, and
middle
you already
programs.
know Joel has like a degree in humanities, and so this is kind of his thing. We already know this is his thing. So okay, do something in literature, something in Greek. So we want our kids to be having this stuff, but and we generally know like there are some things that we really want to hit: the Odyssey, the Iliad. You know, maybe we want to hit Shakespeare and Chaucer and blah 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 blah, Dante. Okay, so but there's a lot of freedom too within some structure. That's ministry I think is working very well because of the degree of interaction with people, but also that there's some hierarchy. Okay, it's not just a free for all. So that's the example of a ministry I think is working really well. Many of these ministries are working really well, and they're kind of doing what they want, but many of them also could be doing better, and we could kind of change the way that we do the structure. Change the way that we structure this so that we have kind of a flow, right? But you also are involving people in their expertise. And last week we talked about engaging people, bringing them in, listening, understanding what they're bringing to the table and what they're interested in. Because if you're not going to listen to them, if you're not going to pay attention to them, then they're going to drop out eventually. They're not going to just buy into your idea entirely. Okay, they want to have some say. They're like, I don't want to just do, Father Joshua's program of, teaching Plutarch or whatever. Okay, so these are just a few steps for thinking about effective ministries. So if you're a head of one of these, if you're like a leader, a team leader of one of these ministries, this is for you. But it's also for, hopefully we just kind of have this culture at Holy Cross. Who else cares about this? Bring them to the table, right? Who are the other, in the Holy Cross Schoolhouse example, who are the people who are homeschooling? Is it possible to bring them in? Sometimes it's not, right? You have other people, you have kind of, people have kind of like other things that they're also balancing. And they're like, well, I would like to do this, seems neat, but we've got these other things we're also doing, and trying to fit it all together doesn't work. Or maybe you have a kind of a different vision, too, about what you're doing. But if you can bring people in, do try to. Clearly articulate the purpose of the ministry. This is one that actually every single ministry needs to do. Clearly articulate the purpose of the ministry. What is the point, okay? I'm going to give an example, and Sheena's here, and so I want to make sure I tell you this is not a criticism. Because Linthicum Fair, we just had the Linthicum Fair. And you have to mobilize all these people, and you have to organize all this food and all this stuff, right? And nobody wants to do it. And Sheena said,
I don't want to do that.
I know Sheena doesn't want to do it either, but she did it. So why doesn't everybody want to do Linthicum Fair? Or why isn't there like a group of people who are like, I love Linthicum Fair? There are a few. There are a few people.
That was that first generation who already moved away.
Hey, so
Used to first.
part of it is that we have inherited the purpose from the previous generation, but actually they all left. Like, who came up with the crepes idea?
I know.
Aina. Okay, Shamasi Aina. Lovely person. She's been back, but like, probably many of you don't know her. She came up with the crepes idea. There was even a reason why she came up with the crepes idea. Anybody know what the reason she came up with it? Who's the newest member who knows the reason why she came up with crepes? Okay, why do we make crepes? Roxanne knows because she knows Shamasi Aina really well, and she was here. But nobody else knows why we make crepes. Why do we make crepes, Roxanne?
So we didn't used to just make crepes. We used to have desserts from all around the world, which was much more work than making crepes.
Okay.
And the idea was, and that's why we have the flags in front of the booth, is to show that orthodoxy is something that is all around the world and not just specific to our little congregation, and that really the United States is the odd country that we don't have more orthodoxy. And the crepes are very dramatic, and Ina was very good at the visual because she had a degree in media.
Yeah.
And so the crepes are very visual, and takes a minute or two to make them, so you have a chance to talk to the person who's standing in front of the booth. So she had a whole plan, and that's
And-
what we still do.
Right. Well, and the thing is, like, sometimes now we just have the momentum of making crepes, and everybody's like, "Oh, the crepes!" And you know, you go to the meeting on the first day in the middle of like June, I think is when they start meeting, and they're like, "Holy Cross, you're making the crepes, right?" You know, there's not really a question about what we're going to do, and there's a whole kind of system for how everybody decides what they're going to make. And now the Coptic Church came, and they've got the shawarma, or not, they've got the gyros, right? So the kebabs. So you know, we're kind of stuck with crepes, but we have to understand. So we have to take it for ourselves. Like, why are we doing crepes? I was struck by this when we were at the fair this year, because our booth has like all these flags right out front, and I'm like, all these flags out front. What is this? This is pretty, but like, what's going on here? And then our dance group gets up and they start doing all these international dances. I'm like, wow, like we're such an international church. What, like, you know, I was thinking, what are people getting from this? What are they, when they are seeing like the Holy Cross dance and the Holy Cross booth, like what are they, is it like missions? That's what I would think when I was a Protestant. We had like all these flags in my Protestant church and on during missions week. Like what is that what they're into, this Holy Cross church? So there's a lot of thought that's been put into how we are presenting ourselves, but I'm not sure that anybody understands it anymore, except for maybe a few people, and it may not resonate with you, or it may not actually present us well. I mean, it presents us well. I think we look great, but it may not actually present us though. Like, you know, if you had a big icon of Jesus, like maybe that would present us pretty accurately. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, we need to work on what the purpose of this ministry is. We've inherited something, we're doing it, thank God. But we do need to have like a sit down and say, okay, like, what are we doing and why? Deborah.
Well, we used to also have the books and materials, and I think we used to have more action in that area, where people would actually come and get engaged in conversation about what is the Orthodox Church. I think in the short time I was there this year, I think I still heard somebody talking to someone about their connection to Orthodox, even though they're not part of our parish.
Exactly, and I hope nobody is hearing me say we shouldn't be doing the Lincoln Fair. I'm saying we are doing the Lincoln Fair, and let's understand like why we're doing it and what's going on here. We have momentum with this, but we need clarity, right? So we need to clearly articulate the purpose of the ministry. All right, so assess how effectively that purpose is being achieved as the ministry currently operates. That's kind of what I mentioned about the flags and an international kind of feel that we're giving to the people of Linthicum. How does that reality call into question the stated purpose? Let's say you come up with the purpose like, we want to bring 5 people to the Holy Cross. But maybe what we're actually doing is something completely different. Giving people like taste of, I don't know, international cuisine. You know, is what we're doing actually doing that?
I mean, the Coptic Church had these very nice brochures.
Right.
And we didn't have one about Holy Cross or Orthodoxy other than
right.
the book.
Right,
So,
right, exactly.
but
So-
people did come and ask why we had the flags.
Yep, I should have come too. What are the opportunities and limitations that we need to consider? Some of the opportunities and limitations are partly what I mentioned already, like about commuting and growing and turnover. But then there's also opportunities and limitations particular to certain ministries. Like, okay, Peter leads the Byzantine chanters. You have some opportunities, but not everybody in the church is going to be a great chanter. Even if maybe they like sound good when they talk, they have a nice deep voice, or maybe they sing in the other choir, but they just can't figure out Byzantine chant. Like, you figuring out who's going to be a good person who hasn't stepped forward yet to join the choir. Like, how do you identify that person? Like, stand next to them during the service while they're singing? I don't know. There are opportunities, but there are also kind of like limitations. There's limitations in how many people actually can join the choir. Let's say you have a whole bunch of people who want to join the choir, but you're like, whoa, too many people. We don't have enough room at the chant stand. I can't like manage you all. I can't teach you all. You know, there's some limitations as well.
So how do you deal with it? Like when people who are eager to help, but they're not really good fit. They're
Okay.
not going to help.
Great point too. How do you kind of find the right? And this is hard, especially in a church in which we know each other and we love each other, and you have somebody who wants to do something, but is really just not good at it and has tried and is not good at all. Maybe you find kind of like a limited thing for them to do and say, okay, this is going to be your thing. Maybe you kind of gradually transition them into a different ministry. Say, look, I see that you're involved in this other ministry too. That is really where you should put all your eggs. That requires a difficult conversation, right? And that's where if you have other people on your team and it's not just you, it's helpful. Deborah.
I'd just like to say, I mean, yesterday was the day we remember Saint Romanos, and he's the hymnist, the hymnographer who lamented that he couldn't sing well and he was ridiculed by the others that were singing with him, and he prayed, and then the Lord gave him the beautiful Kontakion of Nativity that we sing every year, and then he was prolific, after that. So I'm just saying, leave a little time for a miracle, after, and plus, I would say, even in the music department, there's a lot of people in this parish that I've been here, a couple decades, and I've seen them go from okay to great, just because they've been faithful and God's grace. And,
I love your Romanos example.
Yeah.
Because that's right, we are kind of trying to coach and shepherd and bring people along, and yes, we want to do things well, but at the same time, we are recognizing that we are also leading people. We're not just leading music. We are leading the people at the church in worship, and so there are some standards. It's not just like, well, this person loves the Lord, so we're going to let them sing. We're going to have some standards, and we are, but there's always this tension between kind of high standards and also the reality of the people that you're working with. August, and then Roxanne.
I was thinking, in addition to the international flags, if we could somehow show like attributes of the Orthodox faith in different cultures, that would also be nice. Like iconography from different cultures that people usually don't see. Like
exactly.
Even the places as far as China have Orthodox iconography that could be displayed, and they could find that really interesting.
Great. And so maybe we run with the kind of international idea, but we say, look, this is kind of like representing nations. Maybe we can represent cultures and iconographic cultures better. Like Ethiopian iconography is very different than, well, even Georgian iconography like we have in our church. And Russian iconography is different also. So, great idea. Yes, Roxanne.
You can be on the committee with Tina. I wanted to say, like, as a manager at work, and I frequently hire undergraduate students who come in and work for a year and need to train them quickly. One of the things that I've learned to ask over the years is, how do you learn? Because you may have given someone a task that they are perfectly capable of doing, but you haven't explained it to them in a way that they can understand how to do it. So if they're failing, it might not be their fault. It might be your fault that they're failing.
That's a great point.
But on the other hand, Peter definitely does not want his mother-in-law chanting because she's tone deaf.
Well, and you know your limitations, right? that's a
when
virtue.
When I was in high school, the only high school ministry in the church I grew up in was the choir. All the kids sang in the choir every Wednesday night. That was like, we had choir rehearsal. It was the only thing. And then they had me come, who could not hold a note ever, but loves to sing.
Yes.
And suddenly we had a youth program.
Roxanne.
By the time I graduated, there was a full-fledged youth program with a youth minister.
Yes.
Well, that's an interesting take on short
would work in parish ministry, but in our home, children are unmature until they master it. So if you do a poor job of the bathroom, everybody suffers until you master that chore, because I don't want to let people off the hook and just have them be like, oh, couldn't do it, whoops, you know. So I don't know that that would work with every single ministry, but I guess there is a learning curve, and you can master something over time in most situations. And so I think, you know, rather than starting over being like, oh, that person would be so much better at this, why don't we kick that person out, you know, like, a lot of times it's better to just stay the course and keep the same person, you know, on a specific ministry until they master it, because mastery is possible with a lot of these things.
I will also say a little story that I heard about number 3 pencils. Have you heard about this? Okay, so accounting firms like would supply accountants with number 2 pencils, and every night they'd go through and they'd take out the old ones and put new sharpened pencils there, and they're like, oh, it's getting kind of expensive. And they wanted the accountants to like bring their own pencils to work, but they weren't doing it. So what they did was they instead of supplying number 2 pencils anymore, they supplied number 3 pencils, which don't write quite as darkly. They're more thin line, and you have to kind of they're not as dark. And so the accountants were complaining about these number 3 pencils. Oh my goodness, what is this number 3 pencil thing? And so then they'd start bringing their own number 2 pencils from home, right? And so then the company didn't have to supply pencils anymore. So in ministry, you know, you don't want to be nasty about this, but sometimes maybe you need to make something a little bit difficult to do if you don't want very many people to do it. And sometimes you need to do the opposite. You like, if you want people to sign up for something, it has to be really easy. You can't be like asking them to jump through all these hoops so that they can sign up for if you just want manpower for something, right? But maybe you want like some skilled volunteers who are going to have dedicated time, like probably are going to put a number of hoops for them to jump through. Like, no, you're not quite there yet, and jump through this hoop too. So this is not just useful for accountants. What are the tasks that need to be performed? You actually need to lay this out. I mean, Lincoln Compare was a great example. We know what tasks have to be performed. The tables have to be brought. The tent has to be set up. Somebody has to make a crepe. Somebody has to fill the crepe. Somebody has to take orders, and take money. You know, you've got all of these tasks, and they're all laid out, and you need to fill all of them, right? You have to understand what your tasks are. You have to create a calendar and a budget. Okay, this is something that I think my wife does very well in terms of homeschooling. She is frugal, but I'm thinking about the calendar part. She thinks about, okay, what does each of the kids need to accomplish this year? Like, they need to get through this math, or they need to do. We're gonna focus on poetry this year. Last year was history, and what book are we gonna do, and how are we gonna sequence it over the course of the school year? How long's our school year going to be? It's going to be the entire year, maybe. Anyways, and everything is all laid out, and then you lay out the day. Like, what's our day going to look like? And you put, you know, each person with each hour and who's working with whom, and like the charts that she makes are very elaborate. Maybe that's not your gift, but find somebody who's loving the ministry who can help you with that, right? You need all different kinds of minds. You need somebody who's going to go out and like get people to sign up, and like people person, and you also need like bookish people in all the ministries. You need all of these kind of types of gifts, administration and evangelism, and hopefully nobody is like, I'm the prophet here, but and you also need to make a budget for the church. We are not great at this right now. Our ministries, a lot of times I have a conversation like, well, is this in the budget? Well, I don't know, did you make a budget for that? So we need to get better about each of our ministries making budgets. And then you also have to communicate to the people about this. You know, there's an upcoming event. If you want to get involved in the planning of it, come in now. Okay, we planned it. It's coming up now in a couple weeks. We have to be communicating about it, not just saying to Ken, hey, put this in the DD. But like Ken is very good actually. When he was leading up the men's group coffee hour, he would go around every table. Are you coming to men's group this coming Saturday? It's on Saturday. I'm going to see you there, right? It's great about that. Not everybody's like that either, right? Planners, talkers, like motivators, I should say. So, like, you have to do that though if you want to get people to come to like the men's group or the women's group, and so that's necessary. All right, I'm going to change gears because we've been talking about individual ministries and how to make them better, but there's kind of a bigger picture about how all the ministries fit together with one another. And I want to start out just by talking about how the church is, how our Orthodox church is. I saw this really interesting interview between Bishop Barron, the Catholic bishop, and Jonathan Pageau. And Bishop Barron asked Jonathan Pageau a great question that Jonathan Pageau didn't have an answer for. And it was, so you have a priest who's the head of a church, a parish. You've got a bishop who's the head of a diocese. And then you have a patriarch who's head of many dioceses, right? But then what about, you've got all of the churches, all the patriarchs together. There's nobody up there. Like, why don't you have, a head of your church? So of course, you could say, well, Jesus is our head, but there's a real way in which each of those heads are kind of representing Jesus. So that's a bogus answer. But our church, our Orthodox church, does have as its strength and weakness conciliarity. So this is a triangle. I couldn't really come up with the right image, but the patriarch is just one among many metropolitan bishops, except he is the first among equals. Okay, so he presides at the synod. Let's say there's 24, including the patriarch, there's 24 bishops, metropolitan archbishops, at the Holy Synod that meets in Antioch twice a year. And then they also meet for special occasions if need be. That's just scheduled. They're going to meet in June and like September, December, I can't remember. If they want to call something, the patriarch can call one, or 50% of the bishops can call a special meeting. So he presides over the meeting, but he's also elected amongst the synod to become the patriarch. So let's say Bishop John, Patriarch John dies, the synod will meet, and from amongst themselves they will elect a new patriarch. So the patriarch and the synod kind of have this interesting symbiotic relationship where the synod is kind of primary. It has some. It's not just clearly like patriarch, synod underneath patriarch. No, that's not how it is. It's conciliar. Now there's this quote from Louis Patsapos, who's written many things on. I think he's a canonist. Basic to the ecclesiology of the Orthodox Church is the concept of conciliarity. The Church is, in fact, at her core, always synod, the literal meaning of the word ecclesia, like gathering. The concept of conciliarity, i.e. the conciliar or synodal approach to managing the Church's affairs, is not confined solely to convening various types of synods, but also includes every expression of ecclesiastical life. So, as Orthodox people, we ought to be mindful of the fact that we are conciliar just by nature. But that doesn't mean that you don't have necessarily like a head or at least a leader, right? Okay, so here is like an organizational chart, an example of an organizational chart for our parish. And I have a little quote from Deuteronomy. We read this whenever we have a feast of the Holy Fathers of the Ecumenical Councils. We read it during the Vespers the night before. So I put that quote from Deuteronomy there. But basically, there's the bishop all the way at the top. He's the Metropolitan Saba. Just in case you didn't know, bishop, metropolitan, even a patriarch, these are all one order. It's not like you become ordained You get ordained to be from a priest to a bishop, yes. But once you're a bishop, there's no further ordination. These are kind of like ranks or positions that you hold as a bishop, but you're like spiritual ordination is an overseer. You're a bishop. So you can be an auxiliary bishop, who's like the right hand of another bishop. You can be a bishop, a diocesan bishop who oversees a diocese. You can be a metropolitan archbishop who oversees a metropolitan area that, and underneath it is, or within it is included also some other dioceses that have metropolia, or that have other dioceses with their own bishops. And then you can have a patriarch who is the patriarch over metropolitans, right? He's a bishop oversees metropolitans who oversee dioceses and so on. Diocesan bishops and so on. So Metropolitan Saba is our primary bishop. Bishop Thomas is actually not a diocesan bishop, even though that would make sense. He's not a diocesan bishop. Kind of acts like one. His Mid-Atlantic diocese, right? But he's actually just the right hand of Metropolitan Saba. Metropolitan Saba said, hey, take care of the churches in this region over here. And they don't call it diocese anymore. They don't talk about the diocese of the Midwest, even though it's Dakoma.
When did that happen?
When Metropolitan Saba became metropolitan. They are regions, so it's the Rockma. Region of Oakland, Charleston, and the Midwest. It hasn't changed entirely, but I'm sure it's going to change once they figure it out. So anyways, so the bishop is above the priest. Here in the Holy Cross, it's Father Joshua. I put Ken Hines on there as my right hand, the administrative assistant. I don't know if he might say, actually I'm over here, but we didn't get to talk about this before I put this on here. But I thought, maybe that works there. Anyways, and then there are, so there's bishops, there's priests, and actually it would be really nice if these were all deacons. And in fact, they are kind of like diaconal. Deacon means service, right? So these are really kind of service people. The liturgical deacon, the hospitality and visitation deacon, the operations deacon, the education ministry deacon, the fellowship deacon. But we're just calling them ministry chairs instead of deacons because that would be really confusing. And we would have some women as deacons, and that would be really confusing too. So, so there's kind of these 5 different areas, and there can be different names for them. Hospitality and visitation, that's kind of outreach, right? Other churches actually call this area service. Some churches call it pastoral. But the reason why I call it hospitality and visitation is because I'm thinking of like Matthew 25 and about going out. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you visited me. But also there's a sense of hospitality, bringing people in and also going out to people. Maybe they're members of the church, or maybe they're not members of the church. Going out to just people in the prisons who are not even maybe Christian, right? Evangelism would be part of this as well. So, anyways, you have these 5 different areas in our ministry areas in our church. I put you, Peter Dillon, as the liturgical ministry chair. You know, yeah, exactly. I was filling this out and didn't have names, and we'll talk about that. But the reason why his name came to mind is because we do meet twice a year. Colleen and Peter and I, we meet twice a year to talk about what's the year going to look like. Probably we should expand who's part of that group. Like, what services are we going to do? You know, how many weekday services are we going to do? You know, I oftentimes spring things on them. I'm like, oh, this year we're going to do a lesser blessing of water on August 1st, right? That kind of thing. But there could be more, kind of more discussion about that. Also, maybe the subdeacons could get involved and tweak their rotation or whatever. I don't know. Anyways, hospitality and visitation ministry, operations ministry, education. Deborah is, operations ministry is basically the parish council, The chair is the parish council president, and that's Paul Salib right now. We'll talk about what's below it in a minute. Education ministry chair is Deborah Thomas, and then fellowship ministry chair used to be Christian Wilson, but these things are really kind of not. These are more amorphous and abstract right now. These categories are not very clear. That's partly why I'm going over this and showing you this right now. And I'm going to do an activity here in just a minute, because the activity has to do with like how you understand what kinds of things are in each of these headings. So we've got these different ministry teams, and they basically need to be grouped underneath each of the headings: the liturgical heading, hospitality and visitation, and so on. Underneath the operations ministry, kind of the steering committee for the operations of the church is the parish council. This is the one that is clearly established for the church in the constitution of the church. And the parish council is made up of many people, many of whom are down below, but many of whom are not down below. The steering committee is made up of representatives of the church and representatives of these kind of ministry team areas. And so there's the treasury ministry team, Rebecca Anderson, she's the treasurer, but like Sam counts the treasury. We've got a bookkeeper now who's on staff, who's part of that as well. The property ministry team, right? Cal Oren heads that up, but Kagan works with him, and many of you have also helped out with that. You know, things like cleanup days. Even though that doesn't even necessarily really involve Cal, it does have to do with the running of our property and that. IT, like streaming and website platforms, this kind of thing. Stewardship ministry, that's where like Roxanne just assigns you and Sheena calls you and says, you're up for this, right? And then
volunteer.
Oh yes, that's right. I should have said that. And then this youth protection one, actually the Archdiocese mandated this one that we've been kind of doing ad hoc, but they've figured this out where they've got a whole organization that they want us to work with and so on. So that's coming. But what I want to do right now is an activity for you all. You have to take a few minutes. Here's the list of most of the ministries. There are some things that people do, like as individuals. Here's a list of most of the ministries in the parish, and I want you to categorize them. All right. I'm not sure if I'm going to have enough. Start passing these around. Well, actually, I want you to start doing it yourself, and then we'll do it. There is there we go. No.
Are we supposed to put in like one category, just
Well,
one category, or?
yes, try to make it into just one category. So you're like looking at these ministries and you're saying, well, that's kind of like, you're not sure what any of the headings are.
Column is a group.
Each column is a group.
Okay.
Oh, no.
Oh?
No, on the piece of paper here,
Oh, this
on the
has
piece of
something on it.
paper,
Okay.
there are the headings.
Okay.
So you have, these are just alphabetically organized. These are just alphabetically organized, yeah. So you're trying to categorize them.
They go in.
You want us to categorize those things
Well, yeah, write these ministries
under each heading.
under each heading. Which heading does adult ed go under? Probably it's going to go under education, right? But maybe you have some other idea. Which heading is agape meals going to go under?
Visitation again?
Yeah, let's just go start with
Can you explain hospitality and visitation again?
Like outreach?
Agape meals is Sunday lunch. That's Sunday lunch. What would you call that?
That's like welcoming people in and also it's like being others centered, whether they're coming in or going out.
archdiocese thing that we do once a year, and each region each church sends a team of kids. It's all for kids. And the kids, like last year, I think it was on the Gospel of Matthew. So they studied the Gospel of Matthew. They basically did a Bible competition. And they asked questions. That's a good one. I think it sounds like education, right? Yeah. And the oratorical part of it happens at the same time. It's also a competition for people, teenagers, write their own speeches and give speeches in competition with the other kids. So that would also be Bible study. Bible study.
It could also be
bookstore. So, what's the purpose of the bookstore? Why do we sell books?
I guess it could also be.
I would vote education. That's my vote.
But if there's like
a lot of these activities, like we'll get to Sunday school eventually, and always.
In a few minutes, I'm going to ask you which ones were the hardest to categorize. Which ministries were the hardest to categorize. So if you're finding one of them difficult, circle it so that we can talk about it.
Brother friend of ours, I don't know what it is, but I would assume. Yeah, the brotherhood. Yeah, we do educational things there all the time, and we do service projects also. But the main component on a regular basis is stuff like last night, every first Thursday they meet at Glory Days and have like 15 guys who just eat, drink, and talk.
Oh, man, Prospera. Should say Prospera, not Prospera.
That's for the feasts. That's decorations like in front of the altar, flowers.
And if you don't know what a ministry is,
It's always part of
that's fine too. We can maybe write it on the back or something.
You are too bad.
My ministry is listed.
You can tell me if you come up with one.
IT, operations.
Something that's out there doesn't mean we need a detail to.
Well, we need a deacon team, but we don't have a deacon. All right, just like a minute more.
Here's the
It's okay if you don't get all the way to the end.
What he means by neighborhood relations is what he just described, like the local affair that happens in the community. You know, also once a year on Good Friday.
Yeah, they
stick together
somebody who's in charge of
crosswalk.
church.
They take a cross and they go from church to church. You can walk to all the churches. They're all close by.
And by usher, you mean greater.
Pastor or priest
I
of
do,
the church
yeah.
is there at the doorstep of each church carrying the cross. And
I don't have anywhere to take them
marks
myself.
out to sing along the way or something, but it's a community. That's why it's calling that neighborhood relations.
Yeah.
The thing is the Veterans Day Memorial.
All right.
Across the street. They have a big service.
I'm going to ask for hands of, were there any that were difficult to categorize or that you weren't sure about? Either one.
Yes.
Okay, which is one that, yes, Sheena.
Well, so like donations,
Yeah.
is that hospitality or is that, I don't know.
Yeah, what is that?
Like Trail Life, I was like, is that fellowship and education?
Right, okay, good.
Or outreach, it's not just
outreach is kind of, I think what I mean by hospitality and visitation and outreach, and maybe we'll change it to outreach. It's just that that's not a very biblical word, but whereas I think most of the other words are all somewhere in scriptures or in our, like outreach isn't really, unfortunately, a church or scriptural word. So that's why I tried not to use it. But everybody knows what you mean when you say outreach. So you can just write outreach above hospitality and visitation. That's what you think when you think outreach is what I mean by that. Okay, so good, thank you. Anybody else? Things that were difficult categories or you weren't sure about what they were?
Bookstore.
Oh, bookstore, where does it go?
Liturgical, education, or operations?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
What
good.
was that? What was that
The
comment?
bookstore.
Oh, the bookstore.
And actually, it could even be outreach. Like a lot of people who use it are people who are maybe newcomers. Yeah.
At this point, it's primarily outreach. But you have to get in the doors to get to it.
Yes.
The sign language ministry could be operations, like similar to kind of IT, or it could be liturgical, or it could be hospitality.
Yep.
Just kind of depending on.
How you. And so with these ones that we're talking about, it's especially important that these groups have a clear purpose for what they're doing, right? So that it's clear, like, okay, we fit in this kind of bigger ministry area with the parish. And I probably want to ask, like Mike Marion and now Tabitha and Lola, like, where do you think this is fitting?
You mean Ellen here?
Well, okay, Mike and Ellen Marion. Mike sponsors whenever we get a new person. Ellen, of course, signs, yeah, and Tabitha signs as well. Whenever we get somebody to come in from the outside for like one of our feasts. All right, any other that maybe you didn't know what they were?
I think greeters and like prosra, I put them under liturgical.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, like greeters, part of their job is to kind of maintain order, and if like there's ever some terrible situation where we have to evacuate, they're going to be part of that.
So I put that under operations.
So they're keeping, yeah, could it be operations? But they're also like the first person that people walking through the door see. So it really could be kind of like outreach, hospitality and visitation, right? So it's hard to say.
Well, what's the primary purpose of it?
Exactly.
Because we would have people that would step up if there was a emergency.
Mhm.
Anybody could go ring the bells. And oftentimes someone does step in and ring the bells. It's not always the greeter.
Yep.
But the real reason they have the greeters there is to meet new people coming in the door, right?
Well,
That's my take on it.
yes. That would be my take as well, and I think most of the greeters would say that, but probably not all the greeters. And they probably don't all understand that. So they need to have a clear understanding of what they're doing. Yes.
I didn't without trying to be too contentious, isn't there some beauty in having kind of overlap and not necessarily completely clarifying and categorizing? Like, does every single greeter have to see, like, wouldn't you have fewer greeters sign up if greeting meant being like an extroverted face of Holy Cross? Do you know what I mean? Like, fewer people would sign up for that ministry. If somebody says to themselves, well, I'm good in a crisis and I can keep my head and send people in the right direction, and that's why they've signed up to shake people's hands as they walk in the door, so much the better as far as I'm concerned. Like, just to push back on like
Oh
clarifying
yeah, and sometimes
things.
you get different people who stay. Like you have a really happy greeter, and your extroverted people stay, and you have a quieter greeter who just greets you solemnly, and you come in and say, oh, that was a really nice experience. Nobody's like pushing themselves on you. Right. So different people might want a different thing, right?
And maybe like, isn't there some beauty in not having like every ministry be in a neat little category, but be in different, like, I guess what I'm asking is, what's the point of, why do we need to clarify it so that it only falls into one category? Or are we trying to do that?
Well, that's a great question. yes, I am trying to do that just because it has to land somewhere. But it is great if they do overlap. And there's no problem with that whatsoever. Kind of having an area where it lands is important so that there is some interaction with other groups, and so you can kind of work your ministry with other ministries. And actually, maybe it's time to move on to the next slide because that's a good segue. So these ministry areas, once you kind of like get all these ministries together, I think it's important that these ministries get together, and this is where we have not really gone as a parish. We do need to get these groups together. We've started to try, like with the education group, the fellowship group kind of met, but it's not always clear, like, well, what are we doing? Why are we meeting together? We did try doing this and getting a sense of like what does it mean to do outreach here at Holy Cross, or what does it mean to do education? What are we trying to do? So education is a good example. Like, what ties us together as a group? What are we trying to do? And actually with education, it is bigger than just educating people, like telling people things. We want to form them into the image of Christ, right? And actually, so the liturgical stuff plays into this. The fellowship things these kind of things play into it as well. Outreach plays into it. But what are we doing that is full enough to be able to reach into those other categories, but is particular to education here? And what is our larger objective? What's going on in each of the groups? Like, how does Teen Soil or the youth group relate to Sunday school? Relate to the schoolhouse? How do we communicate between ourselves? Like, are there ways for us that are other than just like a semi-annual meeting or something? How do we communicate between ourselves? So, with example, we would want to ask, what's the scope and sequence for somebody going through the church from infant to elder? Like, okay, how are infants being formed? Well, they're not going to nursery. They're staying in the church. That's liturgical too, right? But you're kind of understanding that's actually part of our education, of the formation of our children from the beginning. We don't have a nursery that they get sent out to. They're in the church. That also actually forms everybody else too. But then, you do want to have particular educational objectives as well. So like as they're getting to be like, they're going up with Cal, he's ringing the bell and introducing them to the holy water, and he's like making this their space, but also giving them reverence. Like, how does that like fit in with what comes next, and so on? How does the adult ed program fit in with maybe a retreat that we have that year? Can we sync them up together? Is that related to things that we're doing with the youth? Come up with a plan. Subsequent meetings may assess whether we're on track. How are we doing? Do we need to start any new ministries or consolidate several into one? Maybe there's a big gap, or maybe we've got like a few things that are trying to do the same thing and none of them doing it well, and we need to consolidate. What kinds of changes are we experiencing in our individual ministries? This is what should be discussed together. Here are just kind of quick notes. In the meetings of these ministry areas with the ministry chair, right? You should be talking about what kinds of changes you're experiencing. How does, we have this new family. Do they know about Teen Soyo? Are they getting? Do they know that these meetings are happening? Are they getting the DD? Yeah. Recently, we got like a message from another church about a thing for young adults. Like, they sent it to me and I sent it to Ken. Ideally, maybe I would get it, but ideally maybe there would be a young adults leader who would get it, and then they would kind of talk amongst themselves, like, how are we going to promote this? Do we want to promote this? Maybe they would say, Ken, we really want to promote this, even to just more people who get the DD who maybe aren't at church every week, so please put it in the DD. Or maybe they'll just put it amongst themselves and say, I don't know, they would make the decision, right? Instead, it's like I get a thing, we post it out there, and nobody's really thinking about it. It's just individuals like deciding, I guess I'll go to that, and not even knowing necessarily whether other individuals are going. And maybe there are some events like St. Mary's is having a retreat, a nativity retreat, and maybe our nativity, maybe our adult ed group, if we had one, would say, hey, this is great. Abbot Sergius is going to be there. We want to get involved. It also would be a good way to do like a pan-Orthodox event, not really pan-Orthodox, but an inter-church event, and we want to go reach out to them. So, and then they would be the ones to send Ken the message, where it's not, I'm not the bottleneck, because if I like forget something, I get a lot of email, right? You're not going to hear about it. So it really needs to be people in charge of things, getting informed about things, and then they're the ones who are spreading the information out. I see a hand. No.
Mine. I was just gonna say,
Deborah.
we might have to, just bear with going back to having more announcements, like during coffee hour or elsewhere. I know people really, apparently, not me, but others didn't like that. But, I mean, that's kind of when you find out. People don't always read their email or whatever. But, if they're here, there was always somebody making an announcement about something that was coming up.
Well, and actually, that is a completely appropriate subject for, like, the operations group, like the parish council. How does our church operate? I don't love giving announcements upstairs. Plus, I'm not sure how effective they are. Like, y'all have just been standing through like 2 hours of church, sometimes longer if you've been to Matins, and you're like, I'm hungry, ready to go downstairs, sweaty, and like, really?
But some people do leave
But,
right after.
but a lot of people leave right afterwards.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, I'm not sure that we're doing the best. That's really what we should be doing. Probably there's a better way, but we need people to come up with it. Otherwise, we're just going to keep doing the same thing, because there's like hundreds of these kinds of things, like announcements, that I can't just like fix all these little things. Somebody else has to like use their creative power. That's like, as the church grows, we need people who are going to do that, right? Ken?
But I think really what you're talking about is not like, do we need more announcements to get the word out? It's a prior question to that.
Exactly.
What are we going to actually announce? And someone's is making those decisions somewhat arbitrarily at this point. I get a lot more stuff sent directly to me at info at Holy Cross that I just like, okay, I don't know anybody that's doing this here, and I don't know if anybody's even interested, and I don't send it to anybody, and I don't send it to you because you already get
Thank you. Yeah.
But I might be missing, so I'm making a personal, individual decision. That's
Right.
not really my decision.
Right.
If it was an educational thing, and that's not a good example because we have a functioning educational unit. But anyway, there are things that I get that don't get announced because I don't know where to send them. And that's all you're saying. And there may be some things that come in, like with the youth. Maybe there's a youth event, and I send it to Mike and Ellen and whoever their ministry team is with them, and they can decide because they're the ones responsible for planning and executing the youth ministry.
Right.
And then they can tell me if it needs to be announced in the DD or not.
Exactly.
And then we go on to announce it in other ways.
Exactly.
But it's the prior question, what should be announced, and who makes those decisions on what's being announced.
That's right. That's right. And that's why having a clear sense of like what we're doing as each ministry, but also then together as education ministries is important. Finally, having a clear idea of, so just to connect the dots finally as we close up. Just like the schoolhouse had kind of a steering committee that I told you about, wasn't everybody who was involved in the co-op, but it was a kind of a select group of some people who were. They were kind of the steering committee. They would gather and they would kind of make some of the procedures and kind of plan things out. Each of these ministry areas really need kind of like a steering committee with a head. So Deborah's the head of the education group. Like, who is she meeting with to discuss some of these things, right? Right, but so she's meeting with Kim because they work really closely on Sunday school. But then if we're thinking about more than just Sunday school in DCS, like there's schoolhouse, there's youth group, there's Bible Bowl, adult ed. You know, if this is all education, what does the steering committee look like? And having a steering committee is important because it also keeps people accountable. Sometimes there are people who are kind of like singular leaders of ministries who drop the ball and they're like, oh, I forgot to even organize that. Like they need some accountability too. So as our parish grows, we need to do two things. We need to be clarifying the purposes of our existing ministries, but then also gathering our ministries together into kind of manageable groups that don't always make complete sense, but at least are manageable groups where we're talking to one another about what we're doing and kind of getting a similar direction towards like here's what we want to do in terms of education. Here's our goal with outreach. You know, one parish's goal with outreach might be really missions centered. Like we really want to do all of these things that are supporting missions. Or maybe it's evangelism centered, or maybe it's like service to the homeless, or this kind of thing, or maybe it's more inwardly like hospitality. Some, especially Middle Eastern parishes, like that's their outreach, feeding people who come to them, right? So you want to have a sense of like what's our kind of like character in this ministry area, and all right, let's get that. And then that's just a question for you. We've looked at the ministries, we've looked at the ministry areas. Where would you like to get involved? What are you really interested in? Many of you are already leading things, and you're already active. I can kind of look around and see most everybody here active in something. But this is what we ought to be asking the people around us as well. We have a clear sense of like now as we've gone through this, how these ministries, what ministries there are, and how they fit together. But not everybody does. So we'll be doing our kind of new time and talent treasure form with all this information. But and so people will be learning about these ministries, but you're an important part of that as well. Okay, thank you so much, everybody.